Welcome back to the English Language Arts series. Today we're going to go over building your vocabulary. So first thing I want to go into is why might you want to do that? And there's at least 3 reasons, there's probably more, but first reason is it allows you to express precisely what's on your mind. So if we recall video number 2.3 on the bullseye, you may have an idea and you might be using words such as sad or happy, but there might be a more precise word, such as nostalgic, for example. Okay, also it'll allow you to understand more as you're reading. That's kind of an obvious one. And the third one is a little less obvious, but I really want to stress the third one, which is it's going to open up your mind. The more words you know, the more of these sort of subtle shades of meaning and ideas you're going to be exposed to. And this is just going to open up your creativity beyond just word use. Alright, so that's a big one. Alright, so now that we're convinced that supposedly you should be increasing your vocabulary, the video content. So this video is going to go over tips, techniques, and best practices. Now, we went over this in an earlier video, number 4, but how do you get the most out of this video? I recommend that you keep a notebook handy or a Word document or something of that nature and jot down things you like. So I may say a lot of things, you don't have to agree with them or use all of them, but if like 1 or 2 or a lot of them jump out at you, you're probably going to retain more if you're taking notes, or maybe start applying it right away to a specific word you're learning. Alright, so actually let me say one more point about opening up your mind. So we talked about the bullseye and being precise, but if you learn more words, think of it like being a painter. So if you're a painter, now you have more colors, and that's gonna maybe change what you decide to paint. So it's not just like, oh boy, I have a new color, but maybe now that you have a lot of red colors, you're gonna paint a sunset instead of, if you didn't have red colors, maybe you would paint the water. Alright, so that's on that. Now, let's go into methods. So there's a ton of methods, and I just want to give you guys the high-level idea that basically they go from inefficient to sort of efficient to very efficient and fun, or maybe effective is the better word. So you could be efficient in learning something, but it might not be effective. So efficient just means how well you can learn something. It doesn't mean that it's a good thing to be learning. Alright, so we want things we don't want to just find an effective way, but we want it to be fun, hopefully. So that's what I want to encourage you. So find, I'll present to you guys a lot of methods, and find whatever you like the best that's both effective and fun. So what's sort of the traditional inefficient method, which is, a vocabulary word, so look up the definition and use rote learning, which is basically just repetition. So big X here because that's not very efficient. You'll see in a little bit like the neuroscience, the brain, the deep reasons of why that's not efficient, but just know that it's still going to work, don't get me wrong, but it's not the best way of going about things. Then the semi-efficient method, which is kind of your traditional method. So you might define a word, so you're going to do both of these still. You're going to repeat it, you're going to use it in a sentence, so that's a good thing. And then maybe you'll look up some synonyms and antonyms. So this is already good stuff, but we're not kind of doing as much as we can here to really learn that word. So that you're like halfway there doing this. Alright, so let's dive in. So what is our goal? Like we said, it's to have effective and fun learning. Like we want to be able to learn the thing and hopefully have as much fun in the process as possible. So I have to take a bit of a detour and tell you guys the truth. So here's the truth. That this is going to be a long-term project. Vocabulary building is a gradual and slow long-term project, so don't rush it. Overall, as you just live life, basically as you have new experiences and get older and are in various situations and around various people, reading books, articles, listening to lectures, you will gradually and slowly pick up words here and there. Long term, that's the key, long term. So, and if you think about it, that's how babies learn most of their words, and how I learn most of my basic as well as advanced words, just by noticing correlations and living life. That said, there are times in life where you may want to expedite this process or to make it more efficient and fun. So this video is meant to help you expedite this process and supercharge or enhance it a bit to the extent possible. Generally, I don't believe in rushing a good thing or in shortcuts. Therefore, you should know that a lot of your new vocabulary can't be forced. However, by using effective techniques, so when I say can't be forced, I mean like you can't learn 1,000 words in a day effectively or 1,000 words in a week. So it's gonna, if you want to learn a lot of words, you kind of have to be patient and know it's going to take a bit of time. However, by using effective techniques and practices, you can be learning the most vocabulary given the experiences you choose to have. So let's take an example. Let's say two students will read the same book, but one of them might look up all the words while the others sort of got the idea anyway and found no need to look up the words. So it depends how hungry you are to learn those words. So this brings us to our first major tip and habit, which is you kind of have to get really obsessive about it. So I recommend every time, I know when I was trying to learn a lot of vocabulary, I got really obsessive. So every time you find a word you don't know, write it down and look it up. For every unknown word, this must become an addiction. So if you get nothing else from this video, I want you guys to get this tip, which is every time you don't know a word that you've come across, write it down every single time. That's gonna you like, don't even worry. If you're doing that, you already have that positive momentum going of like, I'm in this learning process of I'm hungry to learn new words. All right, so let's go into some background on memory. How does memory work in general? So that's a huge topic and one that I studied in undergraduate and college, and you could spend years and years studying it, but I just want to kind of give you guys the gist, which is it's based on association. So islands of association. So imagine these are like these memory 1, memory 2. Imagine these are words. So each one of these is like a word. And think of these as like bridges. So these are like islands, and there's bridges to get from each island to the other island. For memories that are really strong, like if I know the word apple, I have a lot of experiences tied to the word apple. So I might think of the color red. I might think of an apple dropping on Isaac Newton's head. I might think of how tasty an apple is. I might think of like 30 different experiences where I remember eating an apple with my family. So it's a very rich, interconnected network. So the more of these connections you have, the better you're going to learn your word. So, and this is why a strong memory has a lot of rich connections. So like we said, am I likely to forget what an apple is? No, because I have so many connections. On the other hand, when you're doing your rote learning, so when we talked about that inefficient method earlier, if you're just repeating, so if you say, oh, an apple is a red fruit that you eat, or maybe it's a green. So an apple is a type of fruit that you eat. It's a type of fruit that you eat. It's a type of fruit. If that's all you're doing, you're not building a lot of connections. You're just building one connection, and it's just really to your short-term memory. So like the second you get distracted, poof, it's out of your head. So think of it, you might want to think of it like numbers, right? So if I give you guys 10-digit numbers, like memorize 72865 whatever, like a ton of digits, you might be able to keep it in your head, which is already unlikely, but if you were to do it, you'd probably start just repeating the digits. But if I distracted you for a bit and say, hey, look at that bird over there, then you might forget it, because your bridge to that memory, your association is very weak. You have nothing linking it to the rest of your long-term stable memories. All right, so that's sort of the principle. And one thing you'll find is certain systems in humans that are better for remembering. For example, our visual cortex is really great. You probably know that if you meet people, you probably remember their faces, but you can't remember their names as well. So that's because we have a very strong set of visual connections and processing in our brain. So that's why digits are less memorable to us, because it's just like an abstract concept. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The more memorable, the more strong, the more visual, maybe involving the senses, the more awesome our process of learning the word, the more it's going to stick. So if you just do something that's sort of trying to take a shortcut, you're going to get shortcut results. All right, so that's what I have to say on this memory background. And also, like, that's why tip number 1, at least write it down or make a note of the word somewhere, so that if you're in a rush, you come back to it later. Because if you didn't even write the word down, now you're even less likely to look things up. All right, so now let's get into some more detailed tips. Now this is more along the line of per word. So now like you have a word, you want to learn it, what should you do about it? These are going to kind of go from pretty basic things you guys know to more advanced or more important. So that's just sort of the layout, like simple to kind of awesome and intricate. All right, so I'm not going to dwell on this. Define it, use a great definition, look at several definitions. So define the word, that's your standard one. All right, number 2, and this is a really, really big one, which is use it in a memorable sentence. Now, a lot of you guys already know, like, okay, use it in a sentence, duh, like I already heard that. Not a regular sentence, a memorable sentence. So here I want to kind of give a shout out and really thank Ed Cook. So he's a colleague of mine. He has a startup called Memrise. And this example that I'm about to give you guys is going to be, it's actually taken from one of their SAT word courses. So I just want to give credit where credit is due and really thank them. And he's the one that introduced me to this specific technique. So I want to pass it on and give him, give full credit where it's due. All right, so here's an idea. Now this is not the only way to learn things, but it's just to show you like, oh, maybe like what I was doing wasn't even close to this. And I just want to show you the potential of what you could do. And keep in mind, maybe you don't want to do this on every single word. So this, in some words, maybe there's better ways to learn it. So here's one technique. So let's say you want to learn the word deleterious. One short definition is harmful. So something that is harmful. So like that event was deleterious to my health. It was harmful to my health. So now that event was deleterious to my health is like a regular sentence you might use. And now let's take a look at a more advanced sentence. So here I'm going to put a little more energy and think, what does the word deleterious sound like? Again, this is from the Memrise website example. It sounds sort of like deleting an ear. Well, the key to this is breaking it down the way you want to break it down, because you have to remember what it reminds you of. So if I pick my breakdown, that might not be the best for you. So that's why you make this up for yourself. So, but if I thought, oh, deleterious is like deleting an ear, then you could say, if you delete your ear, you may find that it is hurtful and harmful. So what have we done here? We've thought of what that word naturally reminds us of, our natural associations of like the syllable breakdown of the word, and we've incorporated the definition into the sentence. Unlike my original sentence, which was if I had some event was deleterious, it was harmful to my health. That's just like a random sentence and you're not going to remember it. That's just doing a sentence for the sake of doing a sentence. And yes, it's going to have an effect because you're engaging more in learning the word, but I want you to notice how much more energy and sort of cleverness went into this, and how this is richer with the associations, and this is going to help you learn the word way better. All right, so here are just some examples like how you might want to break down some vocabulary words. So maudlin, maybe that reminds me of modeling. Or loquacious, maybe that reminds me of liquor. So if someone's loquacious, that means they were very talkative, and if maybe someone is drunk and has a lot of liquor, they're more likely to talk a lot. So that might be a nice connection. A plum, I might think of a plum as in a fruit, but that might not be the most helpful usage. So maybe I'll think of a plumber. So a plum has to do with poise and in a situation. So basically keeping your wits about you. And a plumber has to deal with some pretty tricky situations and keep their wits about them. So that might be, like a nice breakdown that would help me personally. Or you could say brackish, which has to do with salt water. And if salt water has to do, for me, maybe like brickish. So it doesn't taste really good. It tastes like a brick. Like I said, this may not work for you guys, but it might work for me. Pristine, which means very clear. Or there's other meanings, but maybe pristine sort of sounds like priest to me, and I think of like religiousness and being all like purity and cleanliness. So maybe that's a good association for me to remember it and make a sentence around this breakdown. All right, so that's what I mean about making a memorable sentence. Here's the key idea in doing this. It's going to take more work to do this, but the more energy you put into this process, the better it will stick. So you could, come up with this, like frequently, teachers will say, hey, use it in a sentence. and the student will do it in like 5 seconds. But keep in mind, if you're doing it in 5 seconds, you didn't put a lot of energy into using that word. So the more clever you are, like the more vividness you have in that process, the more engaged you are, the more it will stick. So don't ever feel like, oh man, my friend wrote 20 sentences in that time, but I only wrote 3. If you're really trying in those 3, you're probably going to really learn those 3, and they'll forget those 20 in a week. All right. So that's on that. Now, next tip is going to be about multiplying your learning. So, and by the way, I should mention about like earlier, I don't work for Memrise or anything at the moment, but I've talked and collaborated with Ed. He's mentioned to me how this process works in the past personally, but I'm not an official spokesperson for them. All right. So multiplying your learning. This is sort of a traditional strategy. So if you're learning a word, it might be helpful to learn synonyms and antonyms as well. That way, instead of just learning one word at a time, you're learning like 5 or 10 words at a time, because you get to see, basically, why is this so useful? Because like we said, you're building a lot of those associations and bridges, so you have a richer memory for that word. So even if you forgot like some detail, maybe you remembered a synonym, and that will help spark your memory. So basically learning things in clusters and groups. So synonyms and antonyms, but also just roots, prefixes, and suffixes. So like benevolent, the root bene has to do something good. Malevolent, mal has to do something bad. So stuff like that. So those are A and B. Now with A, I want to give you guys a huge tip or warning, which is make sure you're not just lumping these in and saying, oh, talkative is the same as loquacious, is the same as whatever. A lot of times synonyms and antonyms have different shades of meaning, and that's something you want to pay attention to. Sometimes they're very similar, but sometimes like if you try using it exactly like a synonym, it'll sound really awkward. So just pay attention to those subtle shades of meaning. And also, quick pointer, if you are bilingual, like let's say you speak Spanish or some other language, Italian, Chinese, Russian, whatever, French, doesn't matter, then you may want to use some of your skills from the other language. Like for example, in Spanish there's biblioteca, which means library. And if I'm trying to learn, well, in this case, if I were trying to learn Spanish, in Russian, the word for library is biblioteca. So it's the same word. So in other words, you can use other language tricks, knowledge to help you speed up your learning as well. So anything is fair game. All right. Number 4, creative exercises. The point I want to make here is this is really the tip of the iceberg. So like, please don't limit yourself to these 2 ideas. So I'm just going to give you guys 2 ideas. So one sort of common creative exercise might be take your 10 new vocabulary words and write a one-page story incorporating all 10 into them. Now, obviously, the more fun your story is, the better, but the focus should be on trying to use your words. Now, when I say that, that doesn't mean make a terrible story just so you can use your words. So make it as great as you can as long as you use all of your words. So, and that will, you might have to come up with sort of like a weird story. Like if you remember, we did the free writing or the stream of consciousness video way back when, like one of the first ones in the series. So if your story is a little bit strange because you're using these words, that's okay. So that's part of the challenge of writing. That's why it's a fun creative challenge. Second idea. So second idea would be self-generated vocabulary. So oftentimes you you come across a word that you don't know. But here we're doing the opposite. We're saying, hey, like let's say you go to your kitchen, or you're in the garage, or whatever, you're doing an activity. Maybe you're in a tool shop and you're thinking to yourself, like, what is that thing? Is there a name for this? So the exercise is find 3 things you don't know the names for and look them up. So some details, like these could be household objects, words for certain ideas or concepts, colors of leaves. So maybe it's fall and you're like, oh, I like that color for that leaf. But what color is that? Like, beyond red, it's not really red, or it's not really brown. Is that burgundy? Like what? So that's one way to learn cool new vocabulary. So maybe parts of a machine, tools, literary or poetic concepts, literally anything. You might think like, hey, is there a name for this? So that's another fun way to learn vocabulary, and the point here is you're learning it based off what you're interested in, not what you came across and what somebody else wants you to learn. All right, so number 5. Oh, and I forgot to mention on idea number 2, which is you might have an idea for something and there might not be any word for it. So if you think about Shakespeare, he invented a lot of words and phrases. So feel free, part of the fun of English and ELA is, to an extent, you can make up your own words and explore perhaps maybe if other languages have concepts for these things. So have fun with it. This is not just like, oh, this tool is called a set of pliers, or like these are pliers, that's a screwdriver. There might be you're like, is there a concept for when you stand on your head and make a joke at the same time? I don't know. Have fun with it. All right, and make up your own exercise. If you do have other great exercises, please share with the rest of the folks in the comments. All right, number 5. So find out what works best for you. Personalize and experiment. I'm for any strategy that works. So if you ask me like, hey, is this a good strategy? We can't know. You have to see whether it works for you. So whether it's a book of vocabulary words, software, your own learning method, personalize your learning so that you're inspired and excited to learn and so that it's working for you. Whatever works best for you is the best method for you, So there's no one best method for everybody necessarily. For example, like I know a lot of folks that they love index cards. I never liked index cards. I've always hated index cards. So I tried it, didn't work for me. So keep that in mind. Personalize it, tailor it to yourself. All right, number 6. This is a really big one. Use vocabulary in your daily life. So if you really want to learn it, you have to start using it in your daily speech and in your writing. So even if you start sounding odd to your friends and parents, just don't go too overboard or people they may stop talking to you. But gradually you may want to sneak in a few words here and there. So book knowledge is pointless. Experience is worth 1,000 times more. So start using it. You either use it or lose it. And I really want to emphasize this point. If you don't have a vivid understanding and usage of the word, it's completely pointless to your life and you won't learn it well. So make sure you know how to use it and not just its synonyms. Remember, like words are not completely interchangeable. That's why you want to use it and possibly make a mistake. So find examples of proper usage and stick to those safe cases until you've mastered that word, and only then try to see if you could use it creatively. And then see if you can get feedback about your awkward usage of the word, in which case you'll learn even more about how to use it properly, or maybe a more detailed understanding of its meaning. And so that's critically important. So our first habit, like we said, was jotting down a word every time you don't know a word, and apply things as you learn them, start applying them. All right, so note about quantity. So I recommend learning a smaller amount of words at a slower pace, but more deeply rather than say 50 words a week in a superficial way and a frenzied pace. So for younger students, even 5 to 10 words a week might be more than enough. Unless of course you're doing a lot of advanced reading and listening, or you want to learn a huge list of words in a hurry. Not recommended, but maybe you have an exam and you have to do it for an exam. So don't get hung up on the numbers, the quantity. Focus on the quality. The words are yours when you feel comfortable using them, not when you get them right on a multiple choice test and are looking around to make sure nobody calls you out on an awkward usage during English class. So it's often happened to me that I thought I had mastered a word when it turned out that I didn't know the most basic thing about the word, how to pronounce it. So that means, what does that mean? That means I had never said the word aloud, or at least not in the company of people that could have corrected me. So less is more when you're learning vocab. Slow and steady, less is more. Focus on the quality and the quantity will come. All right. So here's a pro tip. This is one of the things that sort of plagued me, and I know it plagues a lot of folks. Beware of the words that you sort of know. Those are they're the worst, and they're the most dangerous. And they must be banished as being unknown words. So never think I sort of know this word as I know it. Think of it as you don't know it completely. Because here's the thing, if you're sure you have no idea what a word means, you're more likely to look it up. But if you feel kind of comfortable and have these fuzzy, like, oh, I kind of get it, then you're gonna not really take action on it. So, and if you think in general, some of the most dangerous things in life are things that you think you've mastered, but you haven't yet, right? So if you know, for example, you're walking into a dangerous situation, you're going to be more alert. But if, like, you know, everybody's had someone they thought maybe was a friend or was nice to them, but then it turned out they sort of betrayed them or stabbed them in the back, or there's, you know, the famous case of Julius Caesar and the senators. So that's the more dangerous part. So again, if you get sloppy and assume words that you sort of know are known, then that creates a whole foundation of half learning. And it will come down crashing very painfully, like on an exam right when you need it the most. So be aware of those I sort of know that word. If you sort of know it, consider it totally I don't know it. All right. When should you use your new vocabulary? So now you've been learning all this vocabulary, you're all excited, and don't force it. So in your writing, it may be tempting to sound really smart by using all of your latest vocabulary words, all these big words, but any reader worth his or her salt will see through it and think you're an insecure and pretentious writer. So just like you eat when you're hungry, you should only use vocabulary words when they're needed and fit in like the perfect puzzle piece. So if you think back to the bullseye concept, it has to be the perfect choice for that sentence. It shouldn't even feel like you're using a vocabulary word. It should feel like the most obvious and natural choice. So if you feel like, oh, I hope I can sneak in this vocabulary word, then maybe, you know, that's not the right spot to use it. But you got to start somewhere. So maybe in the beginning it might feel a little, you know, like unnatural, but then you'll get a better sense of like, oh, this is appropriate or inappropriate. All right. Finally, in the next video, I want you guys to check out the next video on how to memorize a grocery list effectively. So, which at first may seem like, who cares? This has nothing to do with anything. It has nothing to do with learning vocabulary, but that way you can see what I mean about the amount of vividness and usage that it takes to learn vocabulary more effectively. So in that video, I'll focus on a grocery list, but the part I want you guys to focus on is how even a boring grocery list can come to life with a good learning technique. So the more you can make your vocabulary learning come to life, the more fun and effective it will be. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't get hung up on the grocery list. Just think about like, oh wow, that was pretty cool. Maybe I can apply that to other things. All right, I'll see you guys next video.